I'm Jennifer Hayes, a 35-year-old interior designer who carved out my own life in Tulsa, Oklahoma. One Tuesday evening, my phone lit up with a message from my mother that froze me in place. Don't call or come by. We're finished. My chest tightened, but no tears came. I simply wrote back 2 words. Got it. And just like that, years of sacrifice vanished. All the times I paid Mom's hospital bills, rescued my brother from debt, and kept their struggling restaurant running, erased with one message. I'd always been the outsider, the daughter who chose creativity instead of the family business, the one they quietly dismissed. That text drew a clear boundary. I refused to chase after them again. By midnight, my screen filled with missed calls, overflowing messages, and anxious voicemails. Mom's name popped up repeatedly, then my brother's, even my father's. Panic had set in. They finally realized the support system they'd relied on had stepped away. What came next shattered everything I believed about my family. Stay with me. You won't believe how this story unfolds. And if you've ever been shut out by your own family, please tap like, share your experience in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Growing up in Tulsa, our family looked like a picture of the American dream. My dad was a hometown success story, turning a single diner into a small empire of restaurants. Mom had once worked in banking, but gave it up to support him. She kept the household running and softened his temper when business stress got the best of him. My younger brother Brandon, 4 years my junior, was the pride of the family, the one destined to inherit everything our parents had built. I, on the other hand, was Jennifer Hayes, the misfit whose mind wandered toward colors, textures, and light instead of ledgers and recipes. From an early age, my father made his expectations crystal clear. "The restaurants are our future," he'd announced during dinner, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You'll learn the business, Jennifer." But the thought of kitchens and spreadsheets never stirred anything in me. What I wanted was to create spaces that breathed life into people's days. Homes that felt warm, inspiring, and full of heart. By high school, my notebooks were filled with floor plans and furniture layouts instead of math problems. When I finally confessed my dream of studying interior design, Dad didn't just frown, he laughed. "That's a pastime, not a profession," he snapped, his words slicing through the air. Mom said nothing, her gaze shifting toward the window, silently aligning herself with him. At 17, I sent off my application to a leading art school in Chicago, clinging to the hope that my dream might actually take shape. When the acceptance letter arrived, I felt unstoppable, until Dad's verdict landed like a blow. "If you're not joining the restaurants, you're on your own," he declared, folding his arms with finality. There'd be no tuition help, no financial backing, just a closed door between me and the family I thought would cheer for me. Mom gave a small nod, her silence speaking volumes. Brandon, just 13 then, wore a smug little grin, as if my rejection were his personal victory. In that moment, I realized how firmly the lines were drawn, their golden boy on one side, and me, the disappointment, on the other. I juggled 2 jobs, waiting tables and tutoring, to fill the gaps my scholarships couldn't. Long nights, endless shifts, and the weight of student debt became my normal. Dad never once asked how I was managing, and Mom's occasional "I'm proud of you" rang empty when she'd immediately turn to gush over Brandon's half-hearted efforts at the restaurants. He was untouchable. Skipped school, forgotten orders. It didn't matter. Excuses were always ready for him. I'll never forget one Christmas when I came home from college. Brandon forgot to lock up one of the restaurants, and thieves stole thousands in equipment and cash. Dad brushed it off with a shrug. "He's learning," he said, the same night he scolded me for missing a family dinner to finish a design project. That was the rhythm of our family. His failures forgiven, my ambition criticized. And with every passing year, the distance between us widened. Dad's gaze fixed solely on the son he believed would carry his empire, even though Brandon couldn't care less. Mom mirrored Dad in everything, her affection saved almost entirely for him. I tried to keep our bond alive, weekend calls, sending photos of my sketches, but she was always distracted, her tone distant. "Brandon's been helping at the restaurant," she'd say, as if that simple act made him a hero. I wanted to shout, "What about me?" But instead, I held it in, convincing myself that someday they'd recognize what I'd achieved. By the time I earned my degree, though, the divide was obvious. Back in Tulsa, I'd built a solid reputation, designing boutique hotels and high-end homes, yet every family gathering revolved around their business. "When are you going to join us?" Dad would ask, as if my career were nothing more than a passing phase. Brandon would snicker about my fancy sketches, and Mom would smile along, never once stepping in. Their favoritism had become a barrier so solid it felt like I was shouting through glass. In hindsight, those years were the foundation for everything that came next. I spent so long trying to win a place in their world, to prove I was worthy of their pride, but the harder I worked, the more I realized the truth. Brandon was their chosen one, and I was merely the spare they never wanted to need. After finishing art school, I poured everything into my interior design career. My years in Chicago had expanded my vision. I'd learned that spaces could tell stories, not just hold furniture. When I returned to Tulsa, I started small, redesigning neighborhood cafes and transforming old diners into warm, welcoming places people wanted to linger in. My first real breakthrough came at 27, when a boutique hotel chain hired me to reimagine their lobbies across Oklahoma. I focused on sleek lines, cozy textures, and a quiet sense of sophistication, and people noticed. Before long, high-end restaurants and homeowners were reaching out, and my name, Jennifer Hayes, began showing up in local design magazines and blogs. By 30, I was landing six-figure contracts and earning a reputation as Tulsa's designer for refined, modern interiors. But while my career flourished, life at home told a different story. About 5 years ago, Mom's health took a serious turn. Doctors were blunt. Her treatment would be long, difficult, and unbelievably expensive. Dad's restaurant business was already struggling under rising costs, and their insurance barely covered a fraction of what she needed. I didn't think twice. I transferred the money to cover her hospital bills, specialists, and medications. "We'll pay you back," Dad said curtly over the phone, but I knew repayment would never come. Mom's only response was a brief text. "Thank you, Jennifer." No call, no warmth. It hurt, but I kept reminding myself I was doing it for her well-being, not for their approval. Then there was Brandon. My brother, still in his late 20s, had launched a food truck business that collapsed almost as soon as it began. He'd run up credit card debt, owed suppliers, and couldn't contribute to the family restaurant's bills. One evening, Dad called, his voice firm, detached. "Brandon needs help," he said, like it was a company order, not a request. So I did what I always did. I sent the money. $30,000 to erase his debts, another $20,000 to keep the restaurants open. Brandon never once acknowledged it. At a family barbecue not long after, he boasted about how he'd turned things around, taking full credit for what my savings had done. Dad beamed with pride, slapped him on the back, and I stood there, unseen. It became a cycle. When a new walk-in fridge was needed, I wrote the check. When Mom's treatment required a specialist in Dallas, I covered the travel, the consultations, everything. Each time I told myself, maybe this would be the moment they finally recognized me as more than the family's emergency fund. But at dinners, conversation always circled back to the restaurant, Brandon's potential, or Dad's next big plan. My work barely existed in their world. Once, I showed Mom a magazine feature on one of my hotel designs, hoping to see pride flicker in her eyes. She glanced at it and said, "That's nice, but Brandon's been working so hard lately." I smiled to hide the sting, my chest tightening as I realized how little space I occupied in their hearts. Every call to check on her turned into an update on Brandon or a rundown of Dad's stress. And Dad, he only ever reached out when something needed fixing, never to ask how I was doing or what I'd built. "The restaurant's running short this month," Dad would say, and without hesitation, I'd move money over, feeling less like a daughter and more like their personal bank account. Brandon carried himself as if my success belonged to the family anyway. "You're doing great, so why not help out?" he once said, offhandedly, as though my long nights and endless hustle were just luck I owed them for. Looking back, I realize how foolish I'd been to think money could buy their respect. Every payment, every bailout was my attempt to close a distance they had created, but all it did was feed their expectations. Over the years, the total climbed into the hundreds of thousands, and in return, I got nothing. Not a thank you, not even a moment of recognition. The weight of it all settled quietly on me, heavy and constant, until I began to wonder if I'd ever be enough in their eyes. 5 years into my career, I finally took a leap. My design firm was thriving, and I had a vision to launch a sustainable design company specializing in eco-friendly materials for hotels and restaurants. It wasn't a whim. I had the data, the market research, and a detailed plan showing how green design was the next big wave in Tulsa's hospitality industry. For once, I thought maybe they'd take me seriously, see me as a professional, not a side act. I spent weeks building a full presentation, budgets, growth projections, long-term revenue models. Then I invited my family to meet at our home, ready to pitch them like any serious investor. Standing in that familiar dining room, laptop open and slides prepared, I truly believed this could be the moment everything changed. Dad took his usual seat at the head of the table, arms folded, his expression impossible to read. Mom moved around him, pouring coffee, but avoiding eye contact, as if her silence could shield her from choosing sides. Brandon lounged back, half listening, eyes glued to his phone, already dismissive before I'd begun. His wife, Tara Hayes, sat beside him, polite, quiet, offering me a faint, sympathetic smile. I drew a slow breath and started my presentation, outlining how sustainable materials could lower long-term expenses and attract a new wave of eco-conscious travelers. "This could really put Tulsa on the map," I said, trying to sound confident. "I'm asking for a $200,000 investment. I'll repay it with interest." I didn't even get to the next slide before Dad cut in. "A pipe dream," he said sharply, leaning forward. "You think hotels care about recycled wood? They want cheap, not some fancy experiment." His dismissal stung, but I kept going, pointing to my research, charts, and client surveys. Brandon gave a low laugh without lifting his eyes from his phone. "Sounds like a waste of money," he muttered, the corner of his mouth curling into a smirk. "Why don't you just stick to decorating houses?" Dad said, his tone dripping with condescension. Heat rose up my neck as I clenched my fists beneath the table, trying not to show how much it hurt. Months of research, late nights and planning, dismissed without a second thought. Mom busied herself with the napkins, her familiar escape whenever tension filled the room. I turned toward her, desperate for something. A kind word, a hint of belief. "Mom, you've seen what I can do. You know this could work." She hesitated, eyes down. "It just sounds risky, Jennifer. The restaurants are what we understand." That quiet remark cut deeper than Dad's outburst ever could. After everything, paying her medical bills, saving their business, I was still the outsider. Then, unexpectedly, Tara spoke up, her voice gentle but firm. "I think it's innovative," she said, glancing uneasily at Brandon. "Sustainability really matters now." For a flicker of a moment, I felt hope. But Brandon's sharp glance silenced her. She looked down, lips pressed together. Dad waved a dismissive hand, ending the conversation. "We're not wasting money on this," he said flatly. "Brandon's focused on opening a new restaurant location." "That's our priority," Dad said, final and unyielding. Brandon leaned back with a smug grin, as if he'd just won some unspoken contest I never agreed to join. I made one last attempt to reach them. "This isn't charity," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "It's an investment, with real returns. I built my career from the ground up. You know I can make this work." Dad only shook his head. "You made your choice, Jennifer. The family business comes first." Brandon chimed in with a smirk. Maybe if you spent time at the restaurants, we'd actually take you seriously." I could have screamed. After years of paying their bills, covering their debts, and keeping them afloat, they still saw me as a naive girl with a sketchbook. The room seemed to shrink, the air heavy with rejection. My hands trembled as I closed my laptop, the sound loud in the tense silence. As I turned to leave, Tara met my eyes, her lips forming a quiet, sympathetic, "I'm sorry." Her apology didn't ease the sting. On the drive home, their words echoed in my head, proof that no matter what I achieved, I'd never measure up. Dad's loyalty was fixed on Brandon, always had been. No amount of success on my end could shift that. And Mom, with her quiet compliance, followed his lead, her silence as cutting as any insult. Even Tara, who'd glimpsed the value in my idea, couldn't stand against the family current. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, my business plan open on the table, pages of ambition and hope staring back at me. I'd given it the same devotion I'd given my family, and both had left me feeling empty. Their rejection wasn't really about the money. It was about me. They didn't believe in who I was, and that wound cut the deepest. I didn't realize it then, but that failed meeting marked the start of everything that was about to unravel. A few weeks later, after another tense family dinner, I stumbled upon something I was never meant to hear. The dishes had been cleared, and I stepped into the kitchen to grab my jacket before leaving. Tara lingered by the sink, twisting a dish towel in her hands, her face pale with hesitation. She looked around to make sure no one else was near, then leaned closer, her voice trembling. "Jennifer, there's something you need to know," she whispered, eyes flicking nervously toward the dining room where Dad and Brandon were still deep in conversation. "Brandon's been taking money from the restaurants," Tara whispered, her hands trembling. "Thousands. That's why things are really falling apart." My stomach twisted. I'd known the business was struggling, but I'd blamed the economy, not betrayal. "He's been skimming for years," she went on, her voice unsteady. "I found receipts, separate accounts. He's lying to your parents." I stood there, numb, my mind struggling to catch up with her words. Tara looked like she'd just committed treason, her eyes darting toward the doorway in fear. Before I could respond, Dad's voice boomed from the dining room. Careful not to make a sound, I edged closer, staying hidden just beyond view. His tone was clipped, commanding. "We need to finalize the will," he said. "Brandon's the only one holding this family together. Jennifer's off doing her own thing. She doesn't care about us." My pulse hammered in my ears. I caught Mom's soft reply, words half mumbled, then clearer. "She's done so much for us, Stephen." But Dad's answer came fast, cutting her off like a blade. "Money, not loyalty," Dad said flatly. "Brandon's our legacy. The restaurants will go to him." It felt as if the air vanished from the room. In a single sentence, he'd erased me, wiped away every sacrifice, every late-night transfer, every time I'd stepped in to save them. I slipped quietly out the back door, my mind spinning so fast it barely kept up with my footsteps. Driving home, the pieces started falling into place. Tara's trembling confession, the missing funds, Dad's unwavering devotion. All those years I'd paid Mom's hospital bills, cleared Brandon's debts, and rescued the restaurants from collapse, only to be branded unfaithful. Now it made sense. The constant short months, the unpaid vendors, the pleas for more money. Brandon had been siphoning it all along, and instead of holding him accountable, they were rewarding him, handing over everything I'd fought to preserve. The betrayal seared through me, but I couldn't face them. Not yet. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Mom. "Don't call or come over. We're done." The words hit harder than I expected, like a physical blow. My hands shook as I read them again and again. This wasn't about the will anymore. It was personal. Mom, the one I'd clung to through everything, had chosen to cut me out completely. I typed, "Got it," and pressed send before doubt could creep in. For a moment, my thumb hovered over the call button, but I stopped myself. No more begging. No more chasing after people determined to see me as the outsider. If they wanted distance, I'd give it to them. I opened my banking app and started severing every financial tie I'd maintained. Mom's medical payments, canceled. Brandon's debt transfers, gone. The restaurant's utilities, no longer my responsibility. Over $300,000. Years of my effort and time poured into keeping their lives afloat, erased without gratitude or acknowledgement. As I clicked through the final confirmations, the mixture of freedom and fury hit hard. I wasn't just cutting off the money, I was cutting off the illusion that one day they'd finally see me. Relief washed over me, sharp and unfamiliar, tangled with grief. But beneath it all, Tara's trembling words echoed in my mind, looping like a warning. Brandon's been stealing for years. How long had they known? I couldn't stop wondering. Had Mom and Dad turned a blind eye to Brandon's theft, or had they truly been fooled? Either way, their loyalty was obvious. They'd picked him over me without hesitation. I considered reaching out to Tara for answers, but decided against it. She'd already risked enough by telling me the truth, and I wasn't sure how deep her allegiance to Brandon still ran. That night, I lay in the dark, Mom's message echoing over and over in my mind. We're done. It wasn't just a text. It was a verdict. They had drawn their line, and I was on the other side of it. But I wasn't that desperate girl anymore, begging for scraps of approval. I had built a life on my own, and now I was going to defend it. Their betrayal had sparked something fierce inside me, and this time, I wouldn't let it destroy me. By midnight, my phone lit up like fireworks, missed calls, voicemail alerts, a flood of messages. Mom's name appeared first, then Brandon's, then Dad's. Panic had set in, and I knew exactly why. They'd finally realized the safety net they'd been leaning on for years had disappeared. I didn't pick up. I just sat there on the couch, watching the phone light up again and again, every vibration tightening the knot in my stomach. For years, I'd been the one holding them together, the one keeping everything from collapsing. Now that I'd finally pulled the plug, the cracks were showing. Fast. Brandon's first voicemail came through sharp and bitter. "You think you can just walk away, Jennifer?" he snapped. "You're selfish, leaving us hanging like this." Selfish. The word almost made me laugh. After everything I'd paid, everything I'd sacrificed, I was the selfish one? The restaurant still standing because of me, his debts wiped clean by my money. And yet he had the gall to paint himself as the victim. The next message was colder, his tone calculated. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. "We'll take legal action if we have to." I deleted the message, my hands calm even as my pulse raced. Legal action? For what? Keeping them afloat all these years? The irony was almost laughable. Then came Mom's texts, one after another, a torrent of guilt and blame. "How could you do this to me, Jennifer?" one read. "After everything I've been through, you're abandoning your own mother." Another followed. "I raised you better than this." I stared at the screen, each word a deliberate twist of the knife. She'd always known how to hit where it hurt, using those late-night conversations we once shared as emotional leverage. What used to feel like love now looked like control. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I refused to be pulled back into that cycle of guilt and obligation. Around 1 a.m, my phone rang again. Dad's number this time. I let it roll to voicemail. His voice burst through the speaker, loud and commanding, the same tone that had ruled our household for decades. "Jennifer, you need to fix this," Dad said, his tone clipped and cold, as if I were a worker who'd made a mistake on the job. "The restaurants can't survive without your help." "You owe us that much?" "Owe them?" I'd given them more than $300,000, countless hours, and pieces of myself I could never get back. They'd erased me from their will, dismissed my accomplishments, and crowned Brandon their heir despite his lies. And still, I was the one in debt. I saved the voicemail, not out of remorse, but as proof, a record of who they'd chosen to be. By sunrise, the messages were still flooding in. Brandon texted again, his words as predictable as they were cruel. "You're tearing this family apart. This is on you." I could picture him pacing, phone in hand, furious that his lifeline had finally been cut off, angry not at his own deceit, but at me for refusing to clean it up this time. Tara's name flashed on my screen once. No voicemail, no text. Just a missed call that lingered like a question I wasn't ready to answer. I wondered if Tara was trapped between loyalty and conscience, aware of Brandon's lies but too afraid to speak up again. Then Mom's next voicemail came, her tone softer now, almost trembling. "Jennifer, please," she said, her voice breaking. "We're family. You can't just turn your back on us." For a split second, I wanted to believe her, but the memory of her earlier text, "We're done," burned too deeply. Family didn't cut you off like that, not after everything. Later that afternoon, Dad called again. Against my better judgment, I answered, hoping he might finally acknowledge what they'd done. Instead, his words came like commands. "You're putting your mother's health at risk," he said sharply. "Her treatments are expensive and the restaurants are barely staying open. You need to step up." Not a mention of the will, of Brandon's theft, of the years I'd sacrificed. Just more demands. I tightened my grip on the phone, forcing my voice steady. "I've stepped up for years, Dad," I said quietly. "I'm done." There was a beat of silence before he replied, "You'll change your mind once you see what this does to us." I ended the call without another word, the click final, my resolve like stone. But the messages kept coming. Brandon's next one was pure spite, a thinly veiled threat. "Everyone will know how you betrayed us," he wrote. "They'll see what you've done." I stared at it, realizing just how far he was willing to go to protect his lies. He wrote again, and I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Betrayed them. The irony was almost unbearable. After years of carrying their burdens, that was the story he chose to tell. Then another message came from Mom, this one dressed in nostalgia. "Remember when I helped you with your first sketches?" she wrote. "I've always been there for you." But she hadn't. Not when I needed her to defend me. Not when they mocked my ambitions or dismissed my success. Her support had always come with conditions, and now even her memories felt rewritten to serve her guilt. I said nothing. Every message, every voicemail was just another attempt to drag me back into their chaos, not because they missed me, but because they needed what I provided. For the first time, I saw it for what it truly was. I opened my banking app again, scanning the list of canceled transfers. Mom's medical payments, gone. Brandon's debt relief, over. Dad's restaurant bills, no longer my concern. Years of trying to buy their approval had led me here, and in that moment I finally understood. It was never respect they wanted. It was control. It was control. That's what it had always been. And I was finished giving it to them. By the end of the week, their panic had turned into chaos, messages swinging between anger, guilt, and threats. But I stayed firm. My decision wasn't revenge, it was self-preservation. I wasn't their lifeline anymore. I was Jennifer Hayes, and I was done being their backup plan. A week later, I agreed to meet them at a small cafe in Tulsa. One final conversation, not for reconciliation, but closure. The moment I stepped inside, the tension hit like static in the air. They were all there, Dad, Mom, and Brandon, huddled around a corner table. Tara's chair sat empty. She'd texted earlier, apologizing, saying she couldn't handle the fallout. I took my seat, shoulders straight, heart steady. Gone was the version of me that craved their approval. I looked at them, three faces that once held all my love and now only reminded me of what I'd outgrown. "I sold my sustainable design project," I began, my voice even and deliberate. "A national firm bought it for $1 million. Their eyes snapped to me, wide, stunned, but I didn't give them time to recover. "I built that from the ground up," I said evenly. "Without your money, without your backing, and in spite of every doubt you threw at me." Dad's jaw tightened, the muscle along his cheek twitching. Mom lowered her gaze to the table, and Brandon shifted in his seat, fidgeting like a child caught in a lie. I leaned in, my voice calm but firm. "I gave you everything, my time, my money, my trust, and you threw it away. You chose Brandon over me, even after he stole from you." I stopped short of mentioning Tara's name. She didn't deserve the fallout. Brandon's face flushed crimson. "You're lying," he snapped. You're just jealous. You want to drag us down because you can't stand seeing me succeed." I met his glare without blinking. "The receipts don't lie, Brandon. I know exactly what you did." Mom's hand shot to her mouth, eyes wide, but she stayed silent. Dad's response came sharp and fast, his voice cutting through the air. "You don't get to judge this family," he said, his tone full of the authority he thought still worked on me. "You walked away from the family business," Dad shot back. I let out a short, bitter laugh. "I walked away? No, Dad. You pushed me out. You erased me from your will and called me disloyal." Mom leaned in then, her voice soft, trying the same tone she'd always used to smooth things over. "Jennifer, we're your family. You can't just turn your back on us now." I met her eyes without flinching. "You turned your back first, Mom. That text, 'We're done,' that was your choice." She winced, tears pooling, but I didn't let it move me. "I'm done being your safety net," I said evenly. "I deserve respect, not guilt trips. If you can't give me that, then we're finished." Brandon gave a low scoff, leaning back in his chair. "You think you're better than us? You'll come crawling back when you realize what you've lost." I just shook my head, calm now in a way I'd never been before. "No, Brandon," I said quietly but firmly. "I won't." I rose from my chair, the legs scraping against the tile, the sound sharp in the tense silence. "This is it," I continued. "No more money. No more phone calls. No more second chances." Dad's expression hardened, his voice cold. "You'll regret this, Jennifer," he said, the same words Brandon had thrown at me a week earlier. I didn't reply. I simply turned and walked out, the door swinging shut behind me. My chest felt heavy, but for the first time in years, I could breathe. I didn't look back. A year later, word of what happened reached me through friends in Tulsa. The family restaurants had gone under. Bankruptcy filings, closed doors, debts they couldn't pay without the safety net I'd once provided. Brandon's secret accounts were uncovered, and the lawsuits followed. Vendors dragged him to court, and the truth finally came out. Years of theft buried under excuses and charm. Mom and Dad faded into seclusion, their empire reduced to nothing but memories and regret. Tara, I later learned, had left Brandon and started over somewhere new, far from the wreckage. I never called, never checked in. That part of my life was finished. I channeled everything, the pain, the lessons, the strength, into growing my design firm, finally building something that was entirely mine. The sale of my project opened doors I'd only dreamed of before. I expanded my business, built a team, and began working with clients overseas. My life wasn't flawless, but it was mine, created on my terms, not shaped by their control. I found real peace in setting boundaries, in finally choosing myself over a family that had never truly chosen me. The ache of their betrayal never vanished completely, but it stopped steering my life. With time, I realized something essential. Respect begins within. I had spent years chasing their approval, convinced I needed to prove my worth through sacrifice and success. But no amount of money or effort could rewrite the story they'd already written about me. Walking away wasn't selfish. It was survival. It was how I learned to recognize my own value and to stop fighting for love that had conditions. If you're hearing my story, I hope you carry this with you. Family shouldn't be a lifelong test of endurance. It should be a bond that uplifts, not one that drains you, and when it stops being that, you have every right to step away. Thank you for listening, for sharing this moment with me. Telling this story hasn't been easy, but it's the truth, and it's mine. I'd love to know what you think. Have you ever had to draw the line with your own family? Share your experience in the comments. I'd love to hear how you handled it. Your stories matter, and I'm truly thankful for each of you who stayed until the end and listened.